back to the beginning to start off. Back to 2011. I remember when Instagram first came out, I signed up, and it was a platform where you put up a picture, slapped an old school filter on it to try and make it look like a Polaroid. Shout out X Pro 2. And slowly it evolved into this completely different platform, a multimedia platform where people are using it to really create community and almost like their own media platforms. So DeRay, I want to start with you. I want to ask you guys a little bit about your earliest memories of Instagram when you first logged on. How were you using it? And when did you realize that this could become a tool for you in your activist work?
Yeah, you know, when we were in the street in St. Louis, we weren't really using Instagram all that much. I wasn't using it until people started to repost and things like that. In the beginning, Twitter was like what we used more than anything, you know, and I think about our safety often. The first person ever permanently banned from Twitter was banned for raising money to try and get me killed, and that was like the platform that we used the most. Instagram has been interesting because now with stories, we can actually tell better narratives about justice in ways that we just couldn't do 4, 5, 6 years ago.
And when was it that you realized that it was becoming this more powerful tool for you than, say, other social platforms?
I think stories really changed the equation because everybody could be a journalist in their own way, and that was really powerful.
And Blair, you're more Gen Z, so I'm curious to hear your perspective of, you know, when Instagram was on your radar and how you were using it.
So, I mean, my first Instagram is long gone. You know, long live the Finsta. It's deleted. Don't look for it, please. But I think that my earliest memory of Instagram is just like, you know, sharing it, having it in high school, like sharing it among friends. But then my mentor and also my cousin, Tay Hansberry, really taught me how to use Instagram and how to, you know, collide the world of social influencing as well as social activism. And then, you know, Instagram became this like highlight reel where you could show your accomplishments, but it also became a tool to generate FOMO so that people would want to come to your events. So if you're doing a protest, people would be interested, or they'd see the diversity of your student organization and they'd want to be a part of it. So it became kind of this marketing tool, and it was so beneficial because we didn't know how to write press releases back then. We didn't have press contacts, so it was great to generate our marketing ourselves. And I kind of use it similarly today.
And one thing that I'm curious to hear your perspective on is the generational divide. I think that some older generations perceive social media activism as like lazy or ineffective. You know, they think that young people today, we're just hopping on a hashtag or posting a picture from the comfort of our own homes, and we're not really out there making direct action or impact. And Adam, I want to hear your perspective on this, because you're someone who's had tremendous success using social media to galvanize direct, tangible action. Can you share a little bit about how you've been able to use the platform and what tactics have been successful for you to get people to actually take action?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And I have a social media rule that I always use, which is I don't post anything unless it's either hopeful or a direct call to action. So if, you know, he who shall not be named does something that I don't like, you'll never see me just post something that says, like, I'm really upset about this. It's horrible. You'll always see it followed by, if you're upset with this new policy, meet me at this time, at this place here, or go here and do that. And I found that's been incredibly helpful in using social media as a tool to generate direct action in real life.
And I also would love to hear from you guys. I mean, generating direct action is incredibly important, but there's also something to be said just for representation in and of itself, visibility in and of itself, of communities who are often completely marginalized and who you don't see in any other media platforms. I think all of you guys have kind of also addressed that in your work, and I would love to hear your perspective on how that is also a tool for change.
I think for me, Instagram has been really powerful for that. I get a lot of direct messages through Instagram, and they're always really hopeful and really like, I generally get a lot of like hate on Twitter because people are pretty critical there, but really like very uplifting things on Instagram. And so for a while I had a highlight on my Instagram that was just like good vibes, where people send me messages from all over the world just saying, I saw you, you're a queer Muslim, I feel like I can exist. Some people who even said, that I'm going to the mosque for the first time ever because you've made me feel like I can be a Muslim again. And that's really powerful. I think if you can affect one person in a positive way, that's beautiful. But when you're getting messages, you know, multiple times a week of people saying, you help me feel like I can exist, That's so powerful. And so it is frustrating when I hear people say, oh, it's just social media, because it's a place, you know, it's a virtual space, but it's a place that people go to feel whole again, for people to recharge and to feel energized to do the rest of the work in the world. So if you're in a space that is homophobic or isn't open to you being your whole self, you can go online and be that whole self.
Imagery is important, you know. When you look at stock imagery of a lot of communities, it's insane how, you know, narrow and outdated it is. So it's a really powerful platform. I also want to talk about the importance of hashtags. Obviously, hashtags are a place that I'm sure everybody out here is using. Who out here is checking the Beautycon hashtag? Yes? So, you know, I think that something that sticks out to me is the Black Lives Matter hashtag as a huge turning point in social media activism. You know, we think of social movements today in terms of hashtags. We talk about Me Too. We talk about the Oscar So White campaign. And today it feels natural, but I think prior to Black Lives Matter, that wasn't the case. You were really on ground zero, DeRay, for that entire movement. And I'm curious to hear your perspective on hashtags as a tool. You talked about how it started really on Twitter, but how has it now migrated and manifested on Instagram? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so when we were in the street, I'm reminded that it was really hashtag Ferguson that was the hashtag that really changed everything, and then it morphed into a lot of other things. We think about hashtags as digital paper clips. It allows us to like take a conversation and clip it in a way that people can go back and access. I'll ask you in the audience, one of the things that we try and help people understand is like, what are things about the work that you might not know? So I want you to tell me what % of all arrests that happen in the country do you think happen for violent crimes? So raise your hand if you think that more than 50% of the arrests that happen in the country are for violent crimes. In between 40 and 50%, you have to raise your hand at some point. In between 40 and 50%, 30 and 40%.
I see a small handful of hands.
20 and 30% of the arrests for violent crimes. 10 to 20% for violent crimes, less than 10%. It's 5%. 5% of the arrests that happen in this country are for violent crimes. And I say that because it was social media, it was Instagram, it was Twitter that allowed us to help people like bust myths that were happening in the world. And if you believe that it's 30%, 40%, you're actually more likely to believe that the police are the answer, that incarceration is part of the answer. And then like one of the things that we want to do with the platforms, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Twitter, is like use hashtags, use conversations to help bring you in to learn more than you knew before.
How many of you guys, for example, have been galvanized to action because you saw a video of police brutality, or because you saw a video of somebody saying something bigoted to another individual on the subway or in public? Can I see a show of hands? Has anybody seen those videos? And did that make you feel more likely to participate in creating change than you maybe would have felt if you hadn't encountered it in your day-to-day life? Yes. So I think that's a lot of what we're talking about here today is the power of images, the power of video, the ability to reach people that we may not have been able to reach and engage them in this moment. But posting about this kind of stuff also creates challenges, right? You guys are all people who are sharing really serious stuff on your accounts. And you've grown a following who are looking to you to learn more about these issues. Probably you find that creates an expectation that you must speak publicly about every injustice that happens, and that if you aren't saying something on your socials, that maybe you're fake or you're not really about the cause. And Blair, you posted about this recently. You shared that in the aftermath of the horrific and tragic attacks at Christchurch, one of your followers accused you of not really caring about Muslims and the Muslim community because you hadn't posted something on your grid. You did it on your story or maybe on Twitter. Can you share some of that balancing act of using your personal individual channel to broadcast all of this, but also just being a real person who has a life on and offline?
Definitely. And so when I think, you know, I'm human, I'm 25. When I get criticism, just like many of us, the first thing you want to do is kind of like shut it down, especially if it's hurtful. Like I was about to board the plane literally to go on vacation, and I was not trying to be in the headspace of, you know, being plugged in. So I blocked the person who sent that to me, and then I unblocked them because I was thinking about how hurt people hurt people. People are suffering from trauma, and I recognized that this came from a place of disappointment and from pain and misunderstanding. So I was able to reconnect with the person, show them that I had spoken up. But it is alarming when you look up to somebody for advice. You know, I look up to DeRay and Adam for advice. And when you see them maybe being silent or not being present in the ways that you would imagine they would be, people lash out because they are hurt and they're expecting you to be the solution instead of perhaps looking at themselves and thinking, what can I do to be a solution? And so I talked to the person, and it became a great point of learning for everyone. You know, the idea that just because I didn't post it where you could see it doesn't mean that I was silent and doesn't mean it didn't affect me. And I think that when we look at different groups, different marginalized groups that are affected by a tragedy, like Muslims during the New Zealand tragedy, you might not hear people being vocal because they're processing it themselves, and that's what I was going through. I didn't want to post about it and then get the backlash that, you know, I'm not authentically Muslim enough, I should be quiet, and I didn't want to navigate that publicly. I wanted to mourn and deal with what I was going through myself, so I had actually posted a message for Muslims who have mental health issues like myself, that if you have anxiety, don't push yourself to go to the mosque in the face of a tragedy, because there's a heightened sense of fear that is very valid. And so the person I've actually stayed in touch with, she's 16 years old, she lives in Canada, and we're going to be, you know, chatting all through Ramadan, and she's an amazing artist, but she admitted that it came from a place of pain and from trauma and from hurt. That's not always how it works out, but I think that's the ideal situation where we can both learn, we can both grow, and I think as a public figure, I do take on this role of being a mentor to random folks, but I really appreciate the opportunity to do that because I think the more lives you can touch, a better life is lived.
And I also am curious to hear from you, DeRay, and you, Adam, about this. I think you guys come and operate within activist communities, but you're trying to engage people who are not necessarily in those communities and bring them in. And that sometimes involves doing work in cultural spaces with high-profile people who may not be, you know, part of the movement. Do you find that you get you get criticism for that, that people lash out about it, or that, and how do you balance that as well?
I'm going to answer the same thing, which is that social media and trying to use social media as a tool for social justice is very difficult. I find it very difficult, and I find that it drains on me, and it makes me stressed, and it makes me sometimes have a hard time sleeping. So I come up with rules, and so my rule when it comes to online criticism is I'm allowed to say and do whatever I want. I'm allowed to say and post and do whatever I want, and you are allowed to react to it however you want. That is the social contract that we made when I made my Instagram public, but I don't have to respond. And so sometimes I get really valid criticism from my comments, but sometimes I don't. And so I try to use that rule and remind myself. Another thing that I've found is that no, that's it.
How about you, DeRay?
Yeah, I think about, you know, I get a lot of criticism around the work with celebrities, and there is this idea that we have to make sure that everybody has space in the work. And you know, I remember when Beyonce follows me on Twitter, and I remember meeting B the first time, and it was before Lemonade came out. And there are all these people who were like, what are you doing? And it's like every room I'm in, I'm always trying to talk about the work. So whether it's B or Pharrell or Adele or whoever, it's always trying to figure out, like, how do we bring you closer to the work? Because what you find is that so many people want to make a difference. They do want to be involved. They want to figure out, like, how to make an impact. I remember when they were, I remember before Lemonade came out and, like, the conversations her team was having around, like, the art and, like, what that people want to be close to the work. The question is, like, how do we make space for them? And, like, that's what I'm interested in, is, like, how do we use these platforms to connect people? How do, you know, what I say about the other side is that all the bad people know each other. They do. They are all, like, at Mar-a-Lago. They're, like, having dinner together. It's like, how do we make sure all the good people know each other? How do we, like, bring people into the fold? And social media can help us do that.
So you guys are all going to follow everybody on stage if you're not already, right? Can I hear a sound of voices if you're going to follow these important people making social change today? Good. And I want to ask you guys, so you've all talked about the importance of this Instagram as a storytelling platform, and stories specifically as a tool. Do you guys have any specific tips about creating a compelling narrative using stories that you could share with the audience today if they want to get anybody excited or galvanized around something important to them?
Definitely. So back in 2016, I worked at Planned Parenthood, and that was a big part of the conversation, was how we tell stories. Because when you're looking at statistics on a page, it doesn't feel like a human being. You know, you can learn all about these different facts and figures, but unless it's connected to somebody's reality, from a human psychology standpoint, we can't make that connection. And so I think what's important to do is don't feel like you have to sell your story to somebody. Be authentic, be rooted in your reality, and don't be overly concerned with appealing to people who might be directly against you, because I think that's when you get really burnt out. You should be thinking about the people who maybe are already on your side or are a step away from being on your side but need to hear more. And I think that if you don't, kind of light yourself on fire in order to keep others warm in telling your story, you'll be a lot more effective. So make sure it's rooted in your reality. Make sure that you're not doing it just to appeal to people who are on the opposite side of the aisle, but maybe to get people rallied together so you can be a stronger force together. And also, don't go to a traumatic place. You don't have to, cry every time you tell your story. You don't have to hurt over again every time you tell your story. You can set boundaries for yourself, and I think that's a really healthy thing to do, because not everything is for everyone. Some things can be just for you.
Yeah. I'd say, too, is sort of thinking about the way that as organizers, we say that every story is a lesson in power. So be mindful of the words you use. One of the things that we say with organizers, especially young organizers, is we'll have them sit down and write down every single word that you can use to describe sex. And when you write down all the words that are used to describe sex, you'll realize that it's things like slam, screw, bang, cut. None of those words are actually about intimacy. And that actually means something when we tell stories about what power looks like. The second thing is that sometimes the truth is actually the best story. So we talk, I spend a lot of time around policing and mass incarceration, and what is true is that we arrest more people for weed than all violent crimes combined, and that's after legalization. A third of all the people killed by a stranger in this country is actually killed by a police officer. And the 3 biggest mental health facilities in this country are actually prisons and jails, not hospitals. And it's telling facts, and the truth is actually sometimes the best story.
And Adam, I'm really curious, especially to hear your perspective on the positivity element, because we all know social media can sometimes go into a dark, mean, cruel place. So as someone who specifically is focused on everything you post has to come from a place of positivity, can you talk about putting that into your storytelling?
Yeah, sure. I love Instagram stories, and I'm going to give some great Instagram story tips. But first, I just want to say that I'm really honored to be on a panel next to DeRay. DeRay is a big hero of mine. I think he's the first person that I ever saw use social media as a tool for social justice, and in the context of one of the most important movements, if not the most important movements of our generation. So can we just give a quick...
Yes. Let's give a hand.
Okay, Instagram stories. 1, I always say, treat your Instagram story like the television network it is. I'll do episodes, so it's okay, here I am doing this, and then I'll leave time, and then I'll go and do something else. Another thing is, and this applies to the grid, is there's no such thing as posting too much. If you have something to say, then say it. Cardi B once said that you could post once every 3 hours, and who are we to argue with her on that? So, and also, if it's not authentic, it won't work. They'll see right through it. So don't bother.
Amazing. Well, that is super helpful. I think that those are things that, we also see manifesting in our work at Remezcla. I think another thing that I would add in here is, don't let yourself only be guided by data. When we use social platforms, we have the ability to see so many analytics about what people like, what they don't like. But the truth is, you don't know what you don't know. So it's hard to know if you like something if you've never seen it before. It's hard to know if you connect to a story if you've never heard it before. So when you guys are creating your stories, don't also let yourself be completely guided by what data may be telling you. I can give you an example from the work we do at Remezcla. We know that people are really engaged in stories about empowering communities. And we know that people are really, a large percentage of our audience is Mexican and Mexican American. But if we let ourselves be guided by that data, we would only be speaking to those communities who oftentimes are featured a lot in Latino narratives, and oftentimes we don't hear the voices of people who are from El Salvador, who are from Nicaragua, who are from smaller communities. And when we have actually ignored what the numbers are telling us and just tell the stories that we believe need to be told about the parts of our community community that rarely see themselves, we found that they have a huge amount of success that no data could have ever predicted for us. So that would be my additional tip when you're creating your stories. So our time is winding down on stage, but we do have time for questions from the audience. And I think there are some people who are already kind of queued up. We'll start over here. So we'll check this way, I think. Do we have any questions over here? No?
I can see.
Okay, it looks like it's actually going this way. We do have a question over here.
Hi, Adam. My question is to you.
Hey, sis.
Hey.
Hey.
Being Jewish, being gay, how does that affect you and your religion and your family?
Thank you for asking that.
Because I have a lot of Jewish friends.
Cool, that's awesome. I say that my Judaism is the framework of my activism, and it informs the way that I approach queer activism. In the Talmud, which is an ancient book of Jewish scripture, it says, Kol Yisrael Avrim Zeh Bazeh, which means that all of the Jewish people are meant to watch out for each other and sort of stick up for each other. And so I took that phrase and I just queered it, and now that's become the core of all of my work. I'm always saying that queer people anywhere are responsible for queer people everywhere. The Jewish people, oh, sorry, yeah, great. The Jewish people are a traditionally marginalized group that have survived for so long, and I think that queer people can learn a lot from that, and I'm eager and excited to be that bridge, or at least try to.
Hi, my name is Lauren, and I have a question for DeRay. I was wondering how, as us being like watchers on Instagram, how can we get more involved in like just Black activism and just, you know, being a part of the movement and of our community as well?
That's probably like the most common question I get is like the what can I do? I remind people that Harriet Tubman didn't go to organizer training and made an impact, right? That part of our work is demystifying like the work of activism. That the first thing I ever did in St. Louis was make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Like people see me now with 1 million followers and da-da-da. I had 800 followers. I made amazing peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and like that was the first thing that we did. And most organizing starts with like somebody like you, like in a living room being like, I want to change this. And like that actually matters. So what I'd say is like find an issue that you care about, and you'd be shocked that like your local legislators, the people closest to the issue, nobody's reaching out to them. Like if 10 people call your city council person, 20 people call, that's a huge deal because people actually aren't engaged in that way. So that's like one way to do it. The second way is that there are great people working all across the country, and like you can join their stuff. But like remember, you already have so many of the keys to organizing already. You've had to get people to come over somebody's house, like your aunt's house, they didn't want to be there, that's mobilizing. You've had to like translate a message and it was a hard message to deliver. Like you've actually had the kernels before, and like we want to empower you to understand that.
Hi, over here. My name is Paula, and I recently graduated from college, and thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, I went to Boston College, and we had a lot of incidences on campus that were driven by racism obviously being at a predominantly white institution. And I think like for most people in this audience, a lot of us are young, and a lot of us have really strong feelings about what's going on in the world, but we also are kind of tied to these institutions that we're in, being in high school, being in college, and not always having the agency to make the change that we want. So I was wondering if you guys had any advice for how to create change in those spaces when you're dealing with institutions that are built to wait you out, built to stifle your voice, and like have so much power behind them. Like how can you use social media or any other tools to just get your message out? And also like, I don't know, just dealing with the fact that sometimes being younger, people don't take you as seriously.
Thank you so much for your question. That's a question I get asked often as well. And And I think that we underestimate youth, right? Like across history, young people have been changing the world. Like my uncle, Terrence Roberts, he was one of the Little Rock Nine who at the age of 15 volunteered with Martin Luther King to integrate schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. So the waves of youth activism are by no means new. But I also think that it gives you the grace to be able to push the envelope because you can blame it on your youth if you mess up. And I think that's something that is under discussed because whether you're in school, that means you can go to the dean's office and say, this is something that I want. Get a group of friends together, say, this is something that we want to happen. Do the same thing, like DeRay was saying, calling your legislators, running for office as a young person is something that is extremely powerful and something that you can do. So I think that young people generally, we know what we want to say, we know what we want to do, but we also have this imposter syndrome of feeling like maybe I'm not the right person to do it, or maybe I'm not going to do it correctly. But that's a beautiful thing about being young, is that you can push the envelope even further, and then you can blame your missteps on being still in that learning process. But there's also a great book written by Jamia Wilson that talks at length about how you can get involved in changing your direct area of influence.
All right, I think that was the last question that we have time for, so I want to say a huge thank you to these panelists, to Blair, Adam, and DeRay. Please give them a big round of applause. Like I said, if you're not following them, you better be following them after today so you can figure out how to get involved in the important work that they're doing. Thank you guys so much.